Okay, good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Councillor Paul Ainsley. I am the chair of the General Government and Licensing Committee. The clerk has confirmed we have quorum, so I would like to call meeting number 25 to order and welcome everybody back. I hope you had a safe and well summer with your family and managed to catch your breath, and I want to welcome everybody back. Today's meeting is being held with members of council and city staff participating by video conference. The public continue to participate electronically and can watch the meeting streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. These measures are still necessary to comply with public health guidelines and prevent the spread of COVID-19. The city's clerk staff have connected all registered speakers to meeting by audio. The list of speakers can be viewed online by visiting the General Government Licensing Committee's page at toronto.ca/council and clicking the speakers box for today's meeting. I ask for everyone's patience if we experience any delays or technical problems during the meeting. Members, the city clerk has provided all agenda materials on toronto.ca/council and on the clerk's meeting portal. Clerk's IT staff are available this morning remotely if you need any help with your devices. As part of each agenda item, I will ask members to raise their hand or unmute their mic if they wish to speak or question staff. I'll then create a speakers list and we'll call on members when it is their turn to speak on any given item. When voting on an item or a motion, I ask that members ensure that they keep their video on and to raise their hands to indicate their vote. Members, I want to remind you, you must still submit and approve your motions by email. Staff are available at gglc@toronto.ca to help with any motions that you have on any given item. Although we're meeting in different locations and meeting remotely today, the committee would like to acknowledge the land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty Number 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. At this point, I'm going to ask if there's any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and if you have one, if you could please raise your hand and unmute your mic. Seeing none, can I have a motion to confirm the minutes of our last meeting on June 29th, 2021? Deputy Mayor Holiday is moving adoption of the minutes for June 29th, 2021. All in favor? And that carries. Members will now review the items on our agenda, starting with item GL 25.1. I understand there is a new item of business to introduce, which we will do after our agenda review. So our first item is timed for 9:45. It's an apportionment of property taxes as of September 15th, 2021. It's a public hearing. Our next item is also timed for 9:45. It's the cancellation, reduction, or refund of property taxes as of September 15th, 2021. Number 3 is our largest property tax debtors with tax arrears greater than $500,000 as of June 30th, 2021. Sorry, and I also don't have the speakers list in front of me. Matthew, is there a speaker on number 3?
No, there's no speaker on number 3.
Sorry.
Our next speaker is on number 9, I believe.
All right, thank you. Okay, if nobody has any questions or would like to hold number 3, can I have a motion to move the recommendation in number 3? Moved by Speaker Nunziata. All in favor? That carries. Number 4 is our 2020 accounts receivable write-off report. Would anybody like to hold this item? Somebody like to move the recommendations? Deputy Mayor Holiday, all in favor? Carried. Number 5, award of a request for proposal number document 302-941-0232 to the personal insurance company for a group home and auto insurance program. We have a recommendation before us. Would somebody like to hold this? Seeing none, would somebody like to move the recommendations? Speaker Nunziata, all in favor? Carried. Number 6 is an award of a negotiated request for proposal Ariba document number 27384707765 for various suppliers for the provision of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning and building automation services, maintenance services at various city locations. Would someone like to move the recommendation on this item? Councillor Manses, all in favor? Carried. Sorry, just scrolling through. Number 7, non-competitive contract with Darch Fire Incorporated for the supply and delivery of Bronto and E1 original equipment manufacturer parts and warranty. Can I have a mover for number 7 if nobody would like to hold it? Councillor Manses, would you like to move number 7? Thank you very much. Councillor Manses is moving number 7. All in favor? Carried. Number 8, Toronto Employment and Social Services lease at 111 Wellesley Street East. There's a recommendation before us. Somebody like to move the recommendation? Speaker Nunziata. All in favor? Carried. There is a speaker on number 9, application for approval to expropriate 11 Parliament Street, stage 1. So I'm going to hold that down. Number 10 is an application for approval to expropriate part of 21 Quebec Avenue in Ward 4. Somebody like to move this recommendation? Speaker Nunziata, all in favor? Carried. Number 11 is real estate application for approval to expropriate parts of 39 Old Mill Road, 2662 Bloor Street West, and 21 Old Mill Street. My understanding, stage 1. My understanding is the TTC has some more work that they would like to do with our facilities and real estate staff on this item. So I'm moving a motion to withdraw this from today's agenda. All in favor? And that carries. Number 12 is a real estate acquisition and expropriation of property interests near the Summerhill subway station for the second exit project, stage 1 in Ward 11. Somebody like to move the recommendations on this? Councillor Manses, all in favor? That carries. Number 13, expropriation of permanent and temporary easements in the properties known as 19, 21, 23, 25, and 27 Halford Avenue, stage 1 in Ward 4. Somebody like to move the recommendations? Councillor Manses, all in favor? Carried. Number 14 is an expropriation of a portion of 50 Alma Avenue for the West Toronto Railpath, stage 2. Just to remind members, there is a confidential attachment. This is in Ward 9. Somebody like to move the recommendations? Speaker Nunziata, all in favor? Carried. Number 15 is options to address outstanding tax arrears for the Greek community of Toronto at 136 Sorauren Avenue in Ward 4. Councillor Manses, I believe if there's no questions on this, I believe Councillor Manses, you have a motion on behalf of Councillor Perks. Councillor Perks has also submitted a communication on this item. Councillor Manses, did you want to move your motion now?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just give us 1 sec. We're just preparing the motion to display.
Okay. Okay, the motion is on the screen. So anybody have any questions of Councillor Mantis on this? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? And that carries. Thank you, Councillor Mantis.
And I think we need an item as amended as well.
Oh, sorry. And a motion moved for approval of the item as amended. All in favor? And that carries. Thank you, Matthew. Number 16, non-union separation costs for 2020. Someone like to move the recommendation? Speaker Nunziata, would you like to move it? All in favor? That carries. Number 17, occupational health and safety report for the end of year 2020. Recommendation is to receive.
Mr. Chair, we have a speaker registered on this item.
Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies.
And
I will hold that down.
Yep, that was new this morning.
Thank you, Matthew. Number 18, grievance summary report as of the end of year 2020. The recommendation is to receive this report for information. Moved by Councillor Mansis. All in favor? Carried. Number 19 is a no-fault grant for basement flooding damages. We have 3 speakers on this item. And I believe Matthew, sorry, is it an additional item to be added?
No, I apologize, Mr. Chair. I believe that was from the previous meeting script, so I do apologize for leaving that.
That's okay.
I believe we can go back to our timed items.
All right. Thank you. So we were going to go back to GL 25.1, apportionment of property taxes as of September 15th, 2021 hearing. We do not have any, sorry, we do have 3 registered speakers. The first speaker is Haley Young, followed by Lipman Trong and Isam Al-Karib. And I would just like to let all of the registered speakers know, if you haven't been notified already, you have 5 minutes to address the committee. At the end of your 5 minutes, you can be asked questions for up to 5 minutes by each member of the committee. Once we've listened to all the deputants, we call what is take the item back into committee, where we can ask questions of staff on this item, and then we can each speak on this item for up to 5 minutes and move motions. So saying all of that, our first speaker is Haley Young. Haley, if you're online, you have 5 minutes whenever you would like to start.
Mr. Chair, I just have a note here. Haley Young, she may need to connect her mic or connect their mic in order to speak. Please check your system and see if you can connect your mic.
Haley, can you hear us? Calling on Haley Young, if you can connect your microphone and make your deputation.
Mr. Chair, we could move on to the next speaker and give Haley some time.
Yep, so the next speaker is Lipman Trong. Lipman Trong, are you available for your deputation?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yep, you have 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Sure. So I got this notice for apportionment of taxes for the period, I think, from June to December 2018. And the main issue I have with that is I didn't receive legal title. So it's a condo, and I didn't receive legal title of the condo until December. So I'm kind of confused of why I'm paying taxes for the period, well, mostly starting from June, where I did not have legal title of my condo unit. And I think that's the part that I'm disputing. Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Trong, have you been in touch with staff, like the notice that you received for your taxes? There was contact information on it. Have you been in touch with staff about this?
With who, sorry?
Sorry, when the notice that you received, there would have been contact information on it with city staff for you to either email or call. Have you been in touch with anyone?
Yeah, I did call them. And I guess I wasn't really satisfied with the answer.
Okay.
Because
what was the answer?
I guess it's like they were explaining that because even though I didn't own the condo and the condo at the time belonged to the developer, I still had to pay the taxes. Is because there's a period between when the condo is incorporated, right? Before the condo is incorporated, it still belongs to the developer. And during that period, for some reason, the developer doesn't want to pay taxes on it. So it's being apportioned to the units. That's my understanding from my chat with the staff.
Okay. All right. Does anybody else have any questions of the deputy at this point?
Chair?
Casey, could you, sorry, Deputy Mayor Holiday?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In fact, I was going to suggest that I would ask staff to unpack this for all of us in the questions, but I was going to just ask the speaker if he maintains a relationship with the developer and if he still owes them money, or, you know, is there any transaction still underway between him and that entity? Because I think, as he described, I think there's some taxes owing to the city on this, and you know, it has to do with the flow of money.
Yeah, I don't think I owe the developer anything. I don't have any outstanding balances. I think the issue is with the taxes, which would be with the city, right? Like, I'm new to this, so.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any other questions for the speaker, but I do intend, if you don't ask it first, to ask the staff to talk to us a little bit about this. Thank you.
Yeah. I was just going to ask the appropriate staff now if they'd like to weigh in on this one. Is it Casey Brennan?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chair. I am on the line. I wondered whether you wanted to hear from additional deputants. I suspect the issues are similar in all. So
okay. I think, you know, at this point, Casey, we'll just take them one at a time. Maybe that. Okay. I'm not sure if they're all the same, but we have Mr. Trong now, so maybe we can. Absolutely. We'll take them one at a time.
Okay. So the facts behind this case, and through you, Mr. Chair, this is a condominium development, and the apportionment is for the 2018 taxation year. The request to apportion the taxes came from the developer, in this case, Concord ADEX. And in this particular case, the developer was billed for and paid taxes for the entire year on behalf of all the condominium units. So the developer, the taxes for this year have been paid, but they were paid by the developer for the entire year. Now, what normally happens in these cases is the unit holders become responsible from the date of their occupancy. So even if they occupied these units prior to actual title being transferred, some people moved in April and May, and the actual transfer of title didn't occur until November, when the condominium plan was actually registered. So there was a portion of the year where the current unit owners were living in the unit and were therefore responsible for taxes, but the taxes were paid for by the developer. What this action in front of us today, the apportionment report, does is splits the taxes that were paid by the developer at the developer's request, splits them into individual unit holder portions, effective from the date they occupied the unit.
Okay, thanks, Casey. Deputy Mayor Holiday, did you have questions? Further questions of staff?
Only that because it's been a while since I've been involved in any of these sort of transactions personally. Could you remind us, is that customary that a condominium holder would, or condominium owner or occupant would be responsible to pay the taxes the date they moved in? Is that typical, and this is just happens to be a typical transaction?
Yes, typically, thank you, Councillor Holiday, and through you, Mr. Chair. Typically, on closing, there is an agreement made as to between the purchaser and the developer as to who is responsible for the taxes. In this particular case, there was nothing in the agreement of purchase and sale, nothing on the statement of adjustments on closing. But yes, this is typical because the individual unit holders can't be billed for taxes until they're separately assessed, and that would happen after the declaration is registered. So in this case, that wouldn't have happened until November of the year, and the taxes would have all been billed by that point. They were billed, they were paid by the developer. So this is quite a common occurrence.
Do I understand this correctly, that the developer would then get a refund for those taxes? Or at least they would have a credit, because I think I heard you say they paid the whole year, and so what they're now trying to do is split off parts of that year and have that reassigned back to the people that occupied the units. So they would get something back, I guess.
That's exactly correct. That's exactly correct. Is that the apportionment process determines each unit holder's proportionate share of the taxes that were paid by the developer. The developer then is subject to a credit payable to the developer.
Okay, and so the city doesn't get paid twice. We only get the taxes, like a single value for the taxes, whether it's the unit occupant or the developer, because I guess we'll balance out that money. That's correct. We don't get double.
Exactly correct. No, we don't get double.
Okay, and so if it sounds like the concerns raised by the speaker so far, the city's kind of caught in the middle. We're following the rules and the law, and that speaker may wish to take this up with the developer. Would that be correct?
Yes, and thank you for that question. I think in this case, if there is a discussion to be had, it is either between the solicitor for the vendor and the purchaser to understand the taxes that are payable. This process simply assigns an amount to each of the individual unit holders so that the developer doesn't have to come up with that number. That number is determined by the assessed value of each of the units.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Speaker Nunziata, did I see your hand?
A question, Casey. So what you're saying, though, is that normally what would happen is the developer in a condo would sign an agreement. There would be a signed agreement by the owners prior to moving in. And in this case, there was no signed agreement, correct?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Nunziata, and through you, Mr. Chair. That is correct. Only I think there would have been an understanding between the vendor and the purchasers in this case. But I think, and let me just confirm, according to the developer, my notes indicate, according to the developer, all unit owners were instructed to pay taxes from their effective date of occupancy, as proper tax adjustments were not done at the time of each closing date. So when we have that confirmation from one of the legal firms involved for the developer, that in fact owners were advised to pay the property taxes from the time of their occupancy.
But there was no signed agreement.
No, it doesn't appear that there was no signed agreement because there wasn't a statement of tax adjustments made at the time of transfer.
Okay, thank you.
Sale. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nunziata. Other questions of staff on this deputant? Seeing none, I am going to ask for the third deputant, Isam El Karib. Isam, are you?
Yes, good morning to the committee and to the attendees. My name is Isam El Khatib. I am a resident of 8th Trent Avenue, and I'm also here to dispute the apportionment of taxes. So in my case, I received 2 letters for apportionment of taxes, one for 2018 and one for 2019. In my case, I did not receive title of my unit until October 2020, when I purchased it from someone else. At the time of purchase, these taxes were not disclosed, nor were they part of the transfer of balance between myself and the previous owner at the time of purchase. I don't believe, and neither it's not my opinion, nor is it of the opinion of my lawyer, that these taxes should be paid by myself, as you know, these are for 2018 and 2019, and I purchased this unit in 2020.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Al Khatib. Sorry, my speakers list is in very small font, and my apologies. Casey, can I ask you to weigh in on this one too?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to be clear, this is a different property than the previous property. And in this case, the apportionment in front of committee today is apportioning 2018 and 2019 taxation years, 2 taxation years. The deputant today has advised that he purchased the property in 2020. So as the owner of the unit, the property owner is responsible for any past taxes on that property. Taxes remain with the property and transfer on title. Even when those taxes are added retroactively, the tax responsibility ultimately lies with the current property owner. So in this case, this individual, the deputy today, did in fact purchase the property in 2020. The taxes in question are 2018 and 2019. The recourse here would be for this individual to reopen the statement of adjustments on closing with his vendor's lawyer and between his lawyer as the purchaser. That would allow him to settle. I mean, this is legitimate, that the taxes are now owing, and they're owing by the current property owner. But the resolution to this should be through lawyers revisiting the statement of adjustments at the time of sale. The apportionment process itself is actually correct. Is that clear?
It is. Thank you, Casey. Any other questions of staff on this deputant? Councillor Mantis?
You, Mr. Chair, Casey. So in this scenario, the deputant would have to pay the tax to the city and then get reimbursed by the seller.
That is correct, Councillor Mantis, and through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. The taxes are owing for that particular unit. The deputant here today is the owner of that unit, and therefore the tax responsibility lies with the current owner, even if they were for a period of time before he owned it.
Thank you, Casey. Sorry, Councillor Mantis, did you have further questions?
That's it.
Nope.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question of Mr. Brendan?
Yep.
Just generally about the item. Thank
Deputy
you.
Mayor Holiday?
Thank you for your grace with the procedure here today. Mr. Brennan, could you just tell us in the most general sense, what's the decision before the committee? I mean, I realize the committee can do all kinds of things, but in the case of a tax hearing, it doesn't sound like the amounts are in dispute. It doesn't sound like the technical details are in dispute, right? Like the address, the names, that sort of stuff. We've got the right person. What does the law say? What is the city's obligation to collect taxes? What's our discretion? This seems fairly straightforward to me, but maybe you could let me know if I missed something or understood it incorrectly.
Thank you, Councillor Holliday, for that question, and through you, Mr. Chair. The report before us today divides taxes that are owing to the city amongst the current unit holders. And so to that extent, this report simply advises that these are the taxes that are owing on these units, where they were once under a single parcel. Now they've been apportioned into multiple parcels, all owned by different owners. It establishes the taxes that are payable by each. We have two different situations here today, but the actual apportioned amounts are correct, and the committee is being asked today to approve the apportioned amounts as presented. If property owners wish to dispute the amount because they disagree with the way that it's been apportioned, they can appeal this committee's decision to the Assessment Review Board, and they have a 35-day period to appeal to the Assessment Review Board if they disagree with the numbers. In the case of the second deputant, this is a legal matter that should be taken up between the purchaser's lawyer and the vendor's lawyer, because clearly the taxes relate to a period of time that the current owner didn't own the property. So there is a remedy there, but this should not suspend committee from approving the apportioned amounts today, because the apportioned amounts are correct.
Just a follow-on question, Mr. Brennan. I think the tax laws are relatively simple. That I think you mentioned it. The tax responsibility always rests with the current owner. Now, whether that current owner has legal options to make things right in their eyes, the city always needs to be paid the taxes. And this, with respect to the city's rules, is pretty cut and dry. Like it simply goes with the unit. The city doesn't get into the next layer of assigning it to individuals. It just assigns it to that property address, and that owner, whoever it is then responsible for it. And we basically have to follow the steps in the law before us.
Absolutely correct. Yes, taxes remain with the property. Taxes are transferred when title is transferred. The taxes go with it. They remain a debt owing against that particular piece of property until they are paid.
Okay, and so, we may be sympathetic to some of the arguments that the people have brought forward, but perhaps it's not within our ability to solve. Would that be correct?
And that is correct. And in this case, the committee is only approving the apportioned amounts. The committee cannot direct that somebody else pay the taxes, or that a previous owner be held responsible. That is well beyond this committee's jurisdiction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No further questions.
Thank you, Councillor Holliday. Are there any other questions on this deputant? Seeing none, if we can move back to, is Haley Young available, Matthew?
Yes, I believe Haley is connected, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, Haley Young, can you hear me? I'm calling for Haley Young. Haley Young, are you available for your deputation?
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm just confirming that Haley is unmuted here. If she can hear us, or if she can reach out to us.
Haley Young, one last time.
Now,
Haley?
yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You have 5 minutes to make your deputation to the committee whenever you're ready.
Yeah, okay. The builder disallowed me to occupy the unit from occupation date to the closing date. So I don't know why they ask me still pay the property tax during the time, even they don't allow me to put on the MLS as well. So why should I pay the property tax during that time? I don't think I owe them anything. They are responsible for the property because they have power to, to let the people do whatever they want to do it. So, so they also supposed to take responsibility to pay the property tax during that time.
Okay, and Haley, have you been in touch with our city staff on the notice that you got to pay the taxes? There should have been an email or a phone number. Have you been in touch with city staff?
Yes, I think they sent me the email, sent me the letter as well.
And you don't agree with what city staff said?
No, I think the builder is supposed to take responsibility to pay those things because during the time, as I mentioned, I don't have any rights to occupy this unit. You know, they don't allow me to put on their mails. They don't allow me to occupy because there was no water, no this, no that. So I think I already paid what I was supposed to pay. During that time, it's not responsible to pay the property tax because I don't have any rights during that time.
But have you paid for the unit?
For what?
Do you own the unit?
Yes, I do. I pay the levy cost. I pay the balance. I paid, whatever supposed to pay. But I feel like this is supposed to pay by the builder because during the time I didn't occupy this unit. Why should I pay the property tax?
Well, I think Ms. Young and the way it works, and the staff can correct me if I'm wrong once I've said what I'm about to say, but if you own property, whether or not you occupy it, you have to pay taxes on it. And my understanding would be if you own a unit and you can't get into it because of issues with your builder, you need to take them up with the builder. But you own the property regardless of whether or not you occupy it, and you have to pay taxes on it.
I owned after the closing day, not between the occupying to the closing day, because that time still they don't allow me to do anything. So I mean, if they allowed me occupying, that means occupation day, but they don't allow me to do anything during that time. So they still own the property. So they're supposed to pay it. If they allowed me to occupy, yes, of course I needed to pay. But what the occupy means for me is nothing.
But you've paid for the property. This is a condominium in a building. You've paid for it, and you have the ownership papers, correct?
Yes, I have ownership, but occupying this means I can't occupy there. Even I want to rent it out, I want to live there, but they don't allow me to do anything.
Yeah, so I think you really need to have your lawyer get in touch with the lawyers for the builder, because as I said, and staff will correct me if I'm wrong, and they're feel free to do so, but if you own something, you're expected to pay the property taxes on it, whether you live in it or not. That's Casey, am I correct? Brendan? Casey Brendan, sorry to put you on the spot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In this case, our understanding is that this unit became occupiable in May of 2018, and the deputant here today, whether she occupied it or not, she was eligible to occupy it. I think part of the issue is that she had intended to rent the unit, according to our understanding, and was told by the developer that the unit could not be rented. And so, you know, but the occupancy was still in the control. The unit had been released to the deputant here today, starting in May, and the actual transfer of title took place in November. But even during the occupation period, tenants who would have been tenants at that time were required to pay an amount towards taxes.
Mr. Chair, you appear to be on mute.
Sorry. Well, thank you, Matthew. Does anybody have any questions, further questions on staff on this item? Seeing none, I want to thank the deputants for their time this morning. We're going to bring this back into committee. Does anybody have any questions of staff on this item? Seeing none, speakers on this item? Seeing none, can I have somebody move the recommendations on this item? Or I'm more than happy to move the recommendations on this item. I want to thank the deputants for their time. You know, sometimes taxes can be a bit of a convoluted process. It doesn't always involve the City of Toronto, but I want to thank staff, in particular Casey Brendan, for his answers this morning and bringing some clarity for us as members of the committee on the process for the apportionment of property taxes. I am going to move, I think the answers have been clear. I think the direction have been clear to the deputants. And I want to thank staff and deputants for their time. And I'm moving the recommendation that's before us. All in favor? And that carries. Our next item is also a 9:45 timed item. It is the cancellation, reduction, and refund of property taxes as of September 15th, 2021. It's a public hearing. We have one listed deputant, Ms. Jennifer Avola of Castle Rock and Blackwell LLP. Is Ms. Avola available, Matthew?
Mr. Chair, no, I don't believe that, that Jennifer Avola is connected to the meeting. I believe that she has submitted a communication on the item, however.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you, Matthew. So we have no further listed deputants on this item. Does anybody have any questions of staff on this item? Seeing none, speakers on this item. We have a recommendation before us. Somebody like to move the recommendations on this item? Speaker Nunziata is moving the recommendations. All in favor? Carried. Our next item with deputants is number 9. I'm just going to scroll down to it. I'm almost there. Number 9 is an application for approval to expropriate 11 Parliament Street. This is stage 1 in Ward 10. We have 2 registered speakers. The first one is Paul. My apologies for Marcazio. Mr. Marcazio from the Royal Canadian Yacht Club, you have 5 minutes, and followed by David Mather, also of the Royal Canadian Yacht Club. Mr. Marcazio, you have 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you and members of the committee. My name is Paul Marcaccio. I'm currently the Commodore of the Royal Canadian Yacht Club. As some of you may know, our club, which is located on Toronto Island, has had a presence in the city of Toronto for over 160 years and is a very active contributor to the city's recreational boating community. Attached to your agenda is my letter, which outlines in detail the club's support of the city's plans and our intention to achieve a beneficial arrangement for the city and for our club. I'm here today to tell you that we support the vision for the development of Toronto's waterfront, and to that end, we've engaged in progressive conversations with Waterfront Toronto and Create TO regarding the acquisition of our Parliament Street property. That engagement is extended to permitting invasive testing on our site. We've toured both those organizations through our properties. We've invited them to see our island property and the activities of our club. What I'd like to advise is the importance of replacing the Parliament Street site that is the subject of this proposed expropriation with a permanent site that gives us seawall access for our members and guests to get to our island club. The long-term viability of our 168-year-old club is premised on achieving security of tenure, which the Parliament Street site, which we acquired in 1992, provides us. So while we fully understand the and support the development of the Quayside project, we have been working with the two organizations for the last 18 months very interactively. We currently have a lease for property on Cherry Street, which has seawall, and we've linked our discussions on selling Parliament Street to replacing the seawall with commensurate seawall with permanent tenure on Cherry Street, our current access point. So while this proposal, we're not at all resisting or opposing the advancement of the waterfront project, we're just trying to find the right balance of securing the tenure we need and advancing the city's agenda. Further, we've begun a long-term extensive capital program to improve and update our 100-year-old historical structure, which is our main building on Toronto Island. And we need to be assured we have long-term access to that property. So I'd like to note that although the item before you is to authorize the stage 1 expropriation, I point out that we continue to be in advanced negotiations with Waterfront Toronto and Create TO with the view to reaching an agreement on terms and conditions for the sale of Parliament Street and to secure tenure at 150 Cherry Street. And it's our belief that an agreed settlement will be achieved and is preferable to expropriation for all parties. That is our submission to you today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions for the deputant? Seeing none, Mr. Marcaccio, thank you very much for your time this morning. The second deputant is David Mather, also with the Royal Canadian Yacht Club. Mr. Mather, are you available?
I am indeed.
Okay, you have 5 minutes to address the committee whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. We very much appreciate the opportunity to depute. and we're grateful for that. I am a member of the board of the Royal Canadian Yacht Club and the finance director. I would say that Commodore Boccaccio has very accurately and completely captured the essence of the situation. Perhaps just a little bit of additional color I might provide. If you're not familiar with the operations of the yacht club, the security of seawall access that Commodore Boccaccio referred to is essential to everything that we do. The members go to and from the island on launches that the club owns, which obviously need a spot on the seawall from which to depart and arrive. Everything that goes to the island, whether it's food, building materials, staff, contractors, guests, all goes over to the island and back on a barge towed by a tug. That can only work with seawall access, so that whether it's contractors, suppliers, deliveries, can come to the seawall, be loaded onto the barge and taken over to the island. And similarly, everything else that has to come off the island comes back by the same route. We typically have cranes on the property to facilitate the launch and retrieval of boats from the seawall and provide access. It really is essential to the continuing operation of the club, which is, as the Commodore said, has been on the island for over 100 years. We would emphasize our clear intent and our will is to reach an agreed settlement. We don't believe that an expropriation is in the best interest of any of the parties, and we hope to come to a satisfactory agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mather. Does anybody have any questions of the deputant? Councillor Mansis.
Councillor Holidays had his hand up first, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Speaker Holiday. Or sorry, not Speaker Holiday, Deputy Mayor Holiday. Sorry,
Thank you,
I
Mr.
need more
Chair.
coffee this morning.
That's okay. Thank you for you being so polite, Councillor Mantis. It's okay. Either one of us could go. But thank you to the speaker. And as I was listening to both speakers, I was looking on the internet, just sort of trying to look at the site. I wondered, Mr. Mather, if you could just tell me a little bit more about the operations. I've heard what you had to say about the process and what's going on, but just for the benefit, because I suspect this will come back to council in one form or another at some point in time. I think every yacht club has a launch, and you know, every yacht club probably has things like parking lots and that kind of stuff, but you're unique because you're on the island. Can you tell me a little bit more about what the requirements are of the site? So there's obviously something to put the boat in the water. I think I heard cranes. Is there parking? Like, what are the ingredients that go into the site that you require? And does it look like on Cherry Street, you've got something that's going to work and fit all of those?
Thank you very much. Those are very good questions. The current site on Cherry Street has direct road access from Cherry Street to a parking lot. And the parking lot extends to the seawall, where we have a building to facilitate members coming and contractors coming to and from the island. The launches dock at that site. There's a floating dock adjacent to it where the barges come in to take materials, as I described, to and from the island. That is the entire and complete access to the island for everything that we do over there. To give you a sense of context, the island site is approximately 30 acres. There are multiple buildings on it. There's a 300 dock marina. There's a pool, tennis courts, a lawn bowling green. So there's a very high level of activity. It's not uncommon on a busy day for a couple hundred members to travel to and from the Cherry Street site to the island. And then sorted through all of that are all of the normal logistical issues related to the operation of a site of that size and complexity.
Okay, and so you think the Cherry Street spot is, you know, as good or better than the existing Parliament Street spot to make all that happen? And maybe I'll even back it up even more basic. If I came to visit you one day, I wouldn't. It doesn't sound like I would take the public ferry. I would go to this place and check in there, and then you would arrange the transport over of the visitor or the member, and then all of the logistical stuff that you talked about. It's kind of like your base on the shore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not only correct, but we would be delighted to welcome you to the seawall and take you over.
Wasn't a shameless invite, but I just thank you, but just in theory, just so I understand it, right? Yeah. That's how people go to access the club.
Lots of people, lots of materials.
Okay, so it's kind of like your base on the shore, like your anchor point on the shore. Okay,
Correct.
Thank you. I didn't understand how all this works, so this is very helpful. So I really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing my questions.
No problem, Deputy Mayor Holliday. Councillor Mantis, questions?
Mr. Chair, my question has been answered.
All right. Not only did you defer to the Deputy Mayor, he asked your question for you too. All right. Seeing no more questions of the deputants, I want to thank both of them for their time. We're going to move this into committee. Questions of staff on this item? I saw Speaker Nunziata's hand first.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So if I can ask staff to comment on what the status is and the discussions that you have had with the Yacht Club.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's Pat Matozzo. So I'll act as the facilitator to direct questions. We have both members of my team as well as members of the Waterfront Secretariat. So I'll ask a member of the Waterfront Secretariat or Creatio to address that question on the negotiations.
It's David Stonehouse from the Waterfront Secretariat, and it's actually Waterfront Toronto that has been leading negotiations with the RCYC, with Creatio involved with respect to the Cherry Street property. So I would turn it over to Eric Cunningham, who I believe is on the call. Eric is from Waterfront Toronto.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Eric Cunnington. I'm the Director of Development at Waterfront Toronto. I believe the question was regarding the status of the negotiations, and Mr. Macaccio, I think, related the status of the negotiations accurately when he said that we have been in active negotiations for approximately 18 months. Those negotiations are subject to confidentiality, but we are hopeful that we can reach a negotiated settlement, although we do need to move forward with the Stage 1 expropriation report in order to maintain development timelines for the East Bayfront and Keating Channel precincts, which are both impacted by the extension of the Queen's Quay and Parliament realignment work that is proposed for this site. Hopefully that has answered your question.
Okay, thank you. That's it for my question.
Thank you, Speaker Nunziata. Councillor Mantis.
Through you, Mr. Speaker. Pat, would the expropriation need to be completed independently of the settlement or the agreement between the two, between the city and the yacht club?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's a parallel process. It's just a backstop in case we can't reach a negotiated settlement. So it'll happen in parallel. But our preferred option, again, as Eric had alluded to, was to come to a negotiated settlement versus expropriation. It's all about preserving the project timelines, because I believe that this project wants to start construction as early as 2023. So we're just doing it as a backstop to ensure that we can maintain the construction timelines.
So we just want to make sure that they're going to settle.
Well, both will happen in parallel, and if they settle, then we stop the expropriation process.
So I'm just going to interject as well here, just to suggest that some of these questions, if there's more details that the members of the committee want to ask, I'd recommend be asked in camera.
All right.
Okay.
Other questions of staff on this item? And if
Mr. Chair?
Staff do, Deputy Mayor Holliday?
Thank you. Without getting in trouble from Mr. Lynch, I think I can ask a couple of basic ones. The Cherry Street location, I'm just looking at it on the map, appears to be fairly well developed. I wondered if staff could tell me, without going into in-camera territory, what is the status or the arrangement for RCYC's occupation of that site at present?
So this is Vic Gupta. Through you, Mr. Chair, I can answer that, Deputy Mayor. The RCYC currently occupies, the site that they occupy is actually was a parcel of land that is owned by Cratio, by TPLC, the Portlands company, but is subject to the structured settlement agreement with Ports Toronto. And so this was a parcel that is under the control of Ports Toronto for 50 years. 20 years of that have expired, so there's 30 years remaining. So we are party to a tri-party lease agreement with Ports Toronto and the RCYC. We don't see any benefit of that rental income right now. And so the discussion that we have had is the RCYC's interest in extending that lease beyond that 30 to give them some tenure and continuity.
Okay, so that would be the essence of the discussion of the deputants. Although the report before us is about the expropriation of 11 Parliament, which is their part of their infrastructure, they also currently are operating at another site, and they are looking to, I'm just going to call it, provide different terms or more certainty around that. And that is the essence of the two legs of the discussions that are going on at the most basic sense. And so I guess council would expect, or at least Create TO would expect at some point in the future to be making decisions about the Cherry Street site.
That is correct. Through you, Mr. Chair. We see these two transactions as separate transactions from a Create TO perspective. We are evaluating the proposal at Cherry Street on its own merits and subject to the Portlands planning framework to be consistent with the expectations of council in terms of the future land use. But we understand and appreciate the perspective that RCYC has, and so we're evaluating on that basis. And I mean, I can say this, I think without revealing anything that should be in camera, that we're certainly looking, for a proposal or a deal, a business deal that would lease the property at market rent, and again, be consistent with all of the existing policies that the Portlands planning framework has and that the city has.
Great. Thank you very much for answering my questions.
Thank you, Speaker Holliday. Other questions that can be asked in public on this item? Councillor Mansis, did you want to go on camera to have your questions answered?
No, that's fine.
It's fine. Okay. Other questions on this item from councillors? Seeing none, I will take this into committee. Are there any speakers on this item? Somebody like to move the recommendations on this item? Speaker Nunziata is moving the recommendations. All in favor? No. Carried. And our, next item. Our next item is number 17, Occupational Health and Safety Report for the end of the year 2020. We have a registered speaker, Derek Moran. Derek, are you available?
Can you guys hear me?
I can, Derek. You have 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
All right, I'm just going to start my timer here. I just want to say, by me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent expressed or implied. In doing so is fraud. God bless Her Majesty the Queen, and long live Her Majesty the Queen. So in this report, it mentions about actions taken to address identified hazards associated with work-related COVID-19, included And it goes on to mention things like masking, distancing, personal protective equipment, etc. But what I don't think people realize is the COVID-19 declared emergency has actually been terminated and or revoked, so none of these actions taken listed here I just mentioned in the report are necessary anymore. And in my written presentation, I include a link to the Reopening Ontario Act and a screenshot from it, which give the definition for the COVID-19 declared emergency, and goes on to say at the very bottom of the Act in Section 17 that termination of COVID-19 declared emergency, unless it has been terminated before this section comes into force, the COVID-19 declared emergency is terminated and Ontario Regulation 50/20 declaration of emergency is revoked. Also mentioned in the Act is Section 16, which states that this Act binds the Crown. So in this report, it also says exposure to infectious agents increased from 39 in 2019 to 313 in 2020. The increase was primarily due to work-related COVID-19. So regarding City of Toronto employees on the risk of having an exposure to COVID, who would be stressed out over the possibility of contracting the ever-scary Delta variant, I've provided a link from the Public Health of England, if you're looking at the screenshot in my written presentation, who found that the variant before the Delta variant, which was the Alpha variant, actually had a case fatality rate of 1.9%. Remember that SARS had a fatality rate of 10%. They also note that this Delta variant has a case fatality rate of 0.1%. Now remember, it's Dr. Davila who keeps saying that the UK is the jurisdiction she uses most as a comparable to us here. So not only did the Public Health of England find out this previous variant to the Delta, the Alpha variant, is like, what, 19,000% more fatal than the Delta, they're also implying that if the Delta variant has a case fatality rate of 0.1%, that means for those who end up contracting it, that the Delta variant also comes with it a 99.9% survival rate. Now think about that. We couldn't all meet as usual, Councillor Ainsley, in committee room number 1 today for this meeting because our so-called chief medical officers of health are concealing from us that this Delta variant has a 99.9% survival rate. Another link and screenshot, which I provide in my written presentation from the Public Health of England, shows, and you'll have to use a calculator and do a bit of math here, but that one who is double dosed with a COVID vaccine is 4 times greater of dying from the Delta variant than one who was unvaccinated to begin with. I know that's pretty unbelievable if you're hearing this for the first time. I know Mayor Tory recently spoke out against the spread of disinformation. But again, this isn't my data. This is straight from the Public Health of England's own website and can be easily verified by anyone, including Dr. Davila. And possible reasons for this can be found at the very bottom of my written presentation, which pertains to a phenomenon called ADE, which stands for antibody-dependent enhancement. One of the links I provided says that one potential concern about COVID vaccines is an unusual phenomenon called what's also known as vaccine-associated enhanced respiratory disease, which can occur when a vaccine induces an immune response that causes the disease the vaccine is supposed to protect against to be more severe if you're exposed to the virus. And I just wanted to quickly commend Councillor Matlow, as I believe he is the only member of Toronto Council who has questioned the advice that Dr. Davila has been providing. And that's my time.
Thank you, Derek. Does anybody have any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you very much, Derek, for your time this morning. We're going to bring this back into committee. Does anybody have any questions of staff on this item? Seeing none, can I have somebody move the recommendations on this item? Speaker Nunziata is moving the recommendations on this item. All in favor? Carried. Our next item is GL 25.19, no fault grant for basement flooding damages. We have 3 listed deputants. The first deputant is Mike Mattos from the Mount Dennis Community Association. Mr. Mattos, are you on the line?
Mr. Chair, I've been advised that Mr. Mattos should connect his mic in order to speak to the committee. Oh, sounds like we have him now.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mattos, you have 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. I would just like to bring to the city's attention that the situation on Rockcliffe is unusual because when the County of York or Township of York built a bridge over Jane Street, they built a multi-span trestle bridge. It was Metropolitan Toronto that filled the valley and then put in an inadequate culvert that is undersized and is also too high. So the city of Toronto created a flooding situation for the houses on Rockcliffe and in the area. The city furthermore built a trunk sewer underneath the creek with access by combined sewer overflows. So we have a situation where the city backs up water from Jane Street into the trunk sewers and into people's basements. So we get high pressure sewage coming onto our streets and into our basement because of the inadequacy of the Jane Street crossing. Now in 2008, I was appointed as a citizen rep to the TRCA environmental assessment to look at this. That environmental assessment was delayed and delayed and delayed and only was finally accepted after the flooding of 2013. So we basically lost years and years there. Then, just a couple of years ago, this same environmental assessment was tossed out as being obsolete because it was too old. Meanwhile, the city did another environmental assessment and said, oh, by the way, our storm sewers are flooded by the creek because the creek backs up into the storm sewers. And oh yeah, we've got to fix Jane Street. So we're sitting here with a situation that has been known to the various entities, Metropolitan Toronto, County of York, Borough of York, for decades, and still no action has been taken, and still people's basements are flooded. And this is not aging infrastructure. This is not equal treatment for everybody. This is liability on the part of the city of Toronto to inadequately build a culvert and then to flood hundreds and hundreds of homes and do millions of dollars of damage every time we get a severe flood. So it is for that reason that the councillor thinks that this area requires special attention. So I support her motion that people should be helped out. Now, many of us are losing our insurance, and this is something I'd like to follow up, but perhaps not now. I went from having full coverage to having something like $50,000 coverage with a $10,000 deductible. So effectively, I no longer have insurance against flood because of the number of occasions that this has happened. So the city should take responsibility because the city has now joined forces with the federal government to build a $70,000 fix, but they keep postponing it. There is no date for shovels in the ground. The environmental assessment has not been completed. There are no proposals on how to build it. And we still look out there, and every time it rains, we see the water getting higher and higher, and gets worse and worse every time they issue a building permit in the district, in the Black Creek watershed. So that is why I believe this requires special attention, different from the rest of the city. The city screwed up big time at Jane Street. They've recognized it. The Conservation Authority has said the Jane Street Bridge is inadequate, and yet no action has been taken, and we've known about this for decades. We knew this on day one in 2008 when the environmental assessment started. We were told flat out the bridge isn't big enough, and until we fix that, it's a waste of time. The channel's fine, but the bridge isn't big enough. We get 7 meters of water builds up at Jane Street. Imagine 7 meters of water. It creates a lake that reaches from Jane Street to Weston Road. When I was at a Conservation Authority, I think some of you know I was at the Conservation Authority as a city rep. I asked the people there to do a what if a bus fell into the culvert at Jane Street? And the answer was, oh yeah, the crosstown will be flooded. You know, I mean, that's how close we are to a major disaster here. So this does deserve special attention, and not just to say, oh, we can't afford to give everybody $7,000 because we've got 50 basement flooding areas. No, this one is different. This was caused by negligence and inadequacy on the part of the various bodies known as City of Toronto. And really, that's my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mathos. Appreciate your time this morning. I see a question for you from Deputy Mayor Holiday.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for speaking to us, Mr. Mathos. Do you have advice on if the city was to move forward with a program, what the design would be? So I think there's actually two quantums discussed in the report. I think one of them was an early 2000s example where it was about a $750 grant for homeowners, and then there's a current one of about $7,500 being discussed. And then I think there's some fixed points they're suggesting that, you know, they would be for claims for events in prior rain events. Do you see it as an open-ended program? Is it a one-time? You know, how do you see this working in your mind? You obviously thought about it a lot. I'd like to hear from you about what you think council should do.
Let me put it this way. The decision on whether it's open-ended is City Council. If they fund and authorize the repairs at Jane Street, the problem goes away, and that ends the program. So the decision on how long this goes for is the City of Toronto. And they're talking about starting shovels in the ground, you know, 2025 or something. So it's possible that this is a 4-year program. I would love it if it was a 4-year program. I'd love it even more if it was a 2-year program. But the decision on when the Jane Street crossing is fixed is up to the City of Toronto. And perhaps if the city is on the hook for millions of dollars every time there's a flood, there'll be some urgency to getting Jane Street fixed.
Do you think the $7,500 is the right number? Do you think it should be more or less? And do you think it should be repeat, like you get it once or you get it over and over again every time there's an issue?
$7,500 is a reasonable amount. It allows you to stay somewhere for a few days and to bring somebody in to, it allows you to stay somewhere else. It allows you to bring someone in to deodorize your basement, to sanitize your basement. You know, if you're stupid enough to put $100,000 worth of kit in your basement, I don't really see how you deserve to be reimbursed by the city. You know, our basement is full of plastic furniture and disposables now. And so I think $7,500 might be reasonable, but there is an ongoing expense to bring in a crew to come in and blow the place dry and then sanitize. And $7,500 does cover that.
Do you think that this should be on the property tax base or on the water utility rate base?
Well, if you were charging the parking lots that are flooding us and the warehouses that are flooding us in the water base, I would be happy to say it's go on the water base. But since the people that contribute most to flooding from runoff aren't being taxed in the water base, I would have to say it should be on the tax base.
I'm sorry, could you just elaborate that? I just want to make sure I understand it. Is it
okay?
Again,
right now,
I respect very much what you have to say because you've got a lot of experience in this.
Right now, if we take 2 showers a day instead of 1, we pay extra for stormwater protection. Meanwhile, the parking lot at Yorkdale pays nothing for stormwater protection. It seems rather unfair to ask the people who want to be clean to pay to protect my basement when the people responsible for the flooding with the warehouses with the huge massive roofs that don't use water and don't pay a water surcharge are not contributing. So I would have to say the tax base until the city puts in a surcharge for people who have stormwater runoff and are not paying towards stormwater expenses.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess the last would be, if council did move forward on this, you can bet other areas will come forward with a similar argument and everyone will make their case that they're unique. Are you comfortable as a taxpayer and as a water rate payer, if it did end up in that bucket, also subsidizing their areas for whatever reasons that they bring forward? Would that be acceptable to you?
In general, if 49 of the 50 basement flooding areas are having problems simply because of general inadequacy of the system, as opposed to an area where the problem has been pinpointed and identified by the Conservation Authority as caused by inadequate Toronto infrastructure. I see a difference. If somebody were to step forward and say in Hogs Hollow that Toronto has messed up, or somewhere Maple Leaf Drive where they've relocated a trunk sewer and it's blowing into people's basements, then yes, I think in cases where the city has contributory negligence, they should be allowed. But if it's just simply, it's been there 100 years and we've been in all these buildings and the holes, the sewers aren't big enough, well, I think that, that's buyer beware. But we were here with a fairly safe situation, and then Toronto came in and filled the valley and put us at risk.
Okay.
And that's my thought.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Holliday. Other questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Matos. Our next deputant is Alexandra Arcelisi. Alexandra, are you available?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, you have 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Perfect. Well, hi, Council Committee. We've chatted before in the past, a very similar topic. I've read this review of the no-fault grant, and I have to say that I would like it to be something that occurs on an incident basis and for all residents. Doesn't matter if you have insurance or not. And the reason why I would like to see this adjustment is because myself, as a resident of Cordella, I've had multiple flood incidents. Out of the 6 years I've been on my home, I flooded 3 times. This year alone, we've had 17 flood warnings for this summer, which is from, June to just even last night, we got a flood warning. It's very expensive to have insurance. I only had $10,000 of insurance in 2018. I had to fight with my insurance provider to upgrade that to 20. Once I upgraded this year, I got a letter and was told that if a flood happens, I may not be covered. So residents are running into this issue, like Mr. Mike Matos had mentioned, where you start out with, a high insurance amount, and then you're left with nothing, or insurance kind of dangling, you may or may not be covered. I personally have lost 3 family vehicles to the flood. I've lost 6 car seats. I've lost strollers. I've lost personal items because when I purchased my home, it was not disclosed to me that this home floods or the area is a flood zone. So I would like to see this program in place to help residents. On the dollar amount, I do not agree that $7,500 is enough. That alone, my insurance provider had advised me, had given me an estimate for $10,000 just for them to clean up the sewer backup that was in my basement, not even replacing a furnace, hot water tank from Enbridge. That's another $3,000 they have you pay. So the amount, I guess something is better than nothing, but the frequency of these events and the lack of the City of Toronto doing the basement projects that need to be done in the area would minimize the cost. That's why I don't agree with this statement here. It says unpredictable and potentially excessive. Would not reduce future flood risks. These are all statements that are in that proposal, that document. I don't agree with that statement. And the reason why I don't agree with it is because if the city does the work, the risk lowers significantly. We are in a high-risk area, and it's ridiculous that these projects have not commenced. I was pregnant the first time I had a flood. My daughter is going to be turning 3 in October, and by the time this project starts, she will be 8. I want you to put that in perspective. It's ridiculous that we have, as homeowners, have to go through this and be completely stressed out and in anguish every time it floods, and there's no assistance, there's no emergency plan that comes out, there's no support besides put a claim in, wait. I waited, for example, for my 2020 claim, 9 months to get told your claim is being rejected. And then now I have to proceed with other options. I'm sure you're aware, the other option available to me is the legal route. So personally, as a resident, I am frustrated, and I would like this to be passed, and I'd like to support Nunziata in anything that is going to help and support the residents, but I don't see any action, and I think the cost would be much lower if the city just did the work. You wouldn't be paying out grants, you wouldn't have to do these types of programs if the work was being done in the area. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Arcelisi. Does anybody have any questions for the deputant? Seeing none, thank you very much for your time this morning. Our next deputant is Adamo Arcelisi.
Yes, hi, good morning. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, you have 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Perfect, thank you. So I just essentially going to follow up on my neighbor and my wife's comments there. I respectfully disagree with Mike Matos when he says that the cost being offered is enough to get you out of the house and et cetera, et cetera. As my wife explained, the costs are much more significant. In the report, it indicates that the expected or anticipated payout, if it's maximized, is like 1.1 million and change. Just us as a household, having been flooded so many times, we're almost at a quarter of the value of that amount. So to get offered possibly $7,500 in a blanketed time zone, because it's a one payment for a 2-year, 3-year window, it's not really acceptable. And having gone through the whole process of filing claims, reporting all my losses to insurance, to the city, I don't know how $7,500 is calculated and is acceptable to even be offered, and that's if people even qualify for that, right? So to me, it doesn't really add up. And I just had some general questions actually about the whole process itself. If a resident were to accept or qualify for the payment, the one-time non-fault payment from the city, and let's say they do get the $7,500, what are the what's the fine print that comes with that moving forward, especially because we are in a high flood risk area. We have flooding annually. So far, knock on wood, this year we've been okay. If the city can close the grant at any time because the costs become too unpredictable, then we're back to square one. And it's not really reasonable to just say, okay, if you qualify, you're going to get this money. Because like my wife said, that $7,500 just goes to replacing appliances, furnace, water heater, and then you're back to square one. And I think if people are putting in claims, as the report indicates, there's 600 plus claims that were submitted. Whoever's receiving them, whether it's Claims Pro and the City of Toronto Claims Department reviewing them, they have to be able to determine if the total value of losses annually are, from a neighborhood is $1 million, and people aren't insured because of all the constant flooding. How are they even calculating that $7,500 is acceptable? It just doesn't make, it doesn't add up, right? And I think, moving forward, I would like to see a program in place. I think if the city's willing to offer $7,500, I don't see why claims are being denied in the first place, right? If you're acknowledging there's a flooding issue and we're willing to give you money, and say that where it's a non-fault payment, then why would you deny a claim? And it's up to a resident to prove negligence on the behalf of the city when it's very clear that there is negligence of inaction of doing the work. So I agree with Nunziata's proposal. I think I would like to support it, but where you lose me is the dollar amount, because having lived it for the last 6 years, not including the late nights. Like last night, I was up to 2 a.m. staring out my window because I'm watching my street pool and I'm wondering, am I going to lose my cars? Right. So it doesn't feel like it's being valued with the actual impact of what it is, the experience of living this and what the city is offering. So that's all I have to contribute for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Arcelisi. Does anybody have any questions of the deputant? I see Deputy Mayor Holliday's hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Arcelisi. I just was listening carefully. I was listening carefully to everybody because flooding happens in my ward and Ward 2 just across the river, and like I get it, I completely do.
Right.
I understand the piece on the $7,500. Do you think it's insultingly low? Like, is it like becoming a token? And I want to explore this, right? Because it's kind of like a go no go decision. What do you think?
I think it is. It's a slap in the face because I myself actually work for the city. I've actually dealt with yourself personally in Nunziata's office through my work, so I know, and I know you guys on a different level as well. But when I see $7,500, yeah, it's definitely not acceptable, especially like I described, just to replace appliances. Like my basement, for lack of better words, is unused space, right? I have extensive damage to the front of my house that costs, the average quote is $40,000 to repair, right? So yeah,
it's even more now with COVID.
For sure. And I have a guy coming in, to do some work, and he's telling me right away, this is what it is, right? And I have to eat that cost. And yeah, so I think it has to definitely be based off of the individual household loss. I'm a pretty reasonable person. If I am covered for 50, let's say, right, and my damages are 100, let's talk about the difference, right? And come to a middle ground, especially if it's constantly happening, right? Who has $50,000, $100,000 every year out of their own pocket to pay for this, right?
So here's the math, and I'm going to use some numbers I'm going to kind of half make up because I don't have them in front of me, but they're probably not that far off. Let's say there's 500,000 water service client, like account holders in the city, 500,000. I think that's right, but I could be wrong. But just use it for simple math. Let's say a program is about $1.5 million. For to serve the area, it would give you $7,500. If we multiply that by 10 and gave you a $7,500 limit, that would make it a $15 million program, and suddenly it would cost $30 per water bill per house per year, and it's serving only kind of one spot. Like, do you think people would find it acceptable? Would you find it acceptable, right? Like if you're a water payer and suddenly your bill went up by $30 to pay for a program, and I'm not being facetious in the question. It's kind of like a political question. Like, what do you think about this? Do you think the neighbors would see that as reasonable? And I totally get it, and I maybe understand the predicament that we're in as decision makers on it. And that's why I wanted to make sure that we weren't doing something that was tokenism versus something that made a difference for you. And can we actually do it as a city?
Well, obviously trying to convince people to pay for something that they don't themselves experience is going to be an uphill battle. But, having gone through it myself, I would support, like if I, now that I know what it's like, yeah, I would pay. I personally, we pay for everything. Living in the city is expensive, right? There's always a different way to, pay for something. But I think in this case, like my wife and Mike Maddles had said, if the city is worried about how they're going to get this money and, push it through and get the mass to agree, I think then that should put the fire under, their rear to get the projects done that need to be done. Because you don't have to worry about billing people when you actually do the work. I shouldn't have to pay monthly, or anybody shouldn't have to pay monthly. Not even Yorkdale, let's say, should have to pay monthly because the city is refusing to do work that has historically been noticed and known to be required. But to answer your question, yeah, I guess I would have to say I'm willing to pay Because if some guy in your ward or, you know, on Lease side or whatever, if he's going through the same thing I'm going through, I know probably for the most part firsthand what that guy's going through. And I would support it. I'd be like, yeah, you know, buddy, I've been there. Here you go. Right. That's the human condition. Nobody cares unless they go through it themselves.
Thank you. I really appreciate you talking to us today, and actually everybody that spoke to us today. I didn't ask everyone questions, but thank you.
Speaker Nunziata, questions?
I just have one question to Damo. Damo, you've got the copy of the report from city staff that we've emailed to you. So as you know, in the report from city staff, they're not recommending anything, any action at all. They're just recommending to receive this report.
Right. And so that in itself, to me, speaks volumes because, you know, you've been to my house, you know, we've met each other many times. You know, I don't understand, right? If everyone acknowledges that this is a problem, we're flagged as the #1 flooding area in the neighborhood, why is a city agency saying, you know, no, right? It just, you know, especially, you know, not to go on another rant, but if the mayor even publicly acknowledges that this is an issue, he's come down to Hilldale, there's money for projects, but people aren't even willing to hand out $7,500. That is a slap in the face. That's kind of, you know, double standard in a way, right?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
No problem.
Are there questions of the deputant? Seeing none, Mr. Arcelisi, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, appreciate it.
My pleasure, our pleasure. I'm going to bring this back into committee and ask for questions of staff. Speaker Nunziata.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. Okay, so I want to ask staff on this report. As you know, this was a member's motion that I put through council a few months ago, and this is your response to the member's motion. So if you can just respond to your report and as well give us an update on what's happening in on that project in Rockcliffe.
Through you, Mr. Chair. It's Lou DiGeronimo, General Manager of Toronto Water. The report took a look at the previous discussions by City Council on no-fault grant programs. So we went back to the original 2005 and then 2007. And in only one instance did Council approve a one-time no-fault grant program, and that was after a storm in 2005. And it was not recommended by staff and not accepted by Council as an ongoing program for the very reasons that we've tabled in this report. So this was just bringing forward the previous policy discussions and decisions of Council and updating on some values based on inflationary factors and when the last time there were some payouts. So that's the general approach of the report, and as well indicating that the creation of a program like this does breed some big policy questions. One of the big ones being the city is not required to create any of this. We are not, in our opinion, at fault for any of these. We're dealing with, in the Rockcliffe situation particularly, a group of homes that are in a floodplain. There's quite a number of homes that are located directly in a designated regional floodplain area. And so what is the work that's underway right now? There's, in essence, 3 large environmental assessments that are required throughout that area. There's one specifically being carried out by Toronto Region Conservation Authority and our transportation services, along with ECS and Toronto Water as partners. But it's looking at how do you change some of that floodplain? Can you mitigate the number of homes impacted? And that is by looking at that bridge at Jane Street. The second EA document is the typical basement flooding EAs that Toronto Water conducts. We had completed one for this area, but our conclusion was we could go in and do a whole bunch of sewer work, but that area would still flood unless you address Black Creek and floodplain issue. It would just still top over and would surcharge those sewers, so we would spend tens of millions of dollars for no effect. So we need to update that with the updated EA for the Riverine situation. And then there's a much larger one that covers a large part of the Black Creek sewer shed all the way up towards 401. And that's Black Creek Sanitary Trunk Sewer System EA. And we're looking at not only based on flooding issues, but also growth issues. How do we service growth, particularly in the Downsview area? And how do we deal with the surcharging of the Black Creek sewer that we're seeing right now with these heavy rainstorm events? And that EA is about to be completed. All told, all of those are in the hundreds of millions of dollars worth of capital work that will need to be completed over many years. And we cannot start any construction until all of those EAs are completed, number one, to get the environmental approvals, and two, get the final detailed designs so we know exactly what needs to be programmed for building. So that is where we're at, is completing those environmental studies and moving forward then with detailed design, and they'll be inputted into our capital budgets. So there are earmarks in the budgets for funding, but we do not have all the details in order to start any construction. Okay, so that's the Rockcliffe area. It is an area that has been studied many times. That's correct. And what we need to have is the final detailed designs in hand to start any construction.
Okay, thank you, Lou. And Mr. Chair, I will be speaking, and I do have a motion. If I can be the speaker, okay.
Yeah, I'll make sure you're the first speaker, Speaker Nunziata. Deputy Mayor Holiday, you have questions of staff?
Thank you. I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around the numbers that are in the report. So if I've got this right, a grant program for the period of 2018 to 2020 for Ward 5 alone is 1.267 million. And if that grant program was opened up to the city, it would be about 6.5 million. Is that correct?
Potentially could be. We do note in the report, though, that depending on how that program is designed, if it's open-ended and is accessible anytime there's another storm, it then becomes hard to predict, because these storm events can affect, as we've seen in the storm of 2013, we hit Etobicoke hard, over 4,700 homes. So this is why we're saying there's a lot of risk in putting these types of programs together, especially when you don't have it financed for it to be a no-fault grant program. We have not factored that into any of our rate calculations, because council direction was not to create such a program.
Okay. Now, some of those other places had insurance, and is there a step in here that requires people to go through insurance first and then prove it to us, or is that unknown? I mean, I don't know.
No, that is exactly the way the one-time program functioned in after the 2005 storm. That one-time program that was created, there was a pool of money that was set aside by council. There was a group of homes that were identified, and as we went through the application process, we went through that check to make sure that people were first accessing their insurance coverages and getting appropriate coverage, and then we would deal with the remainder. That's why in the staff report, just so you understand the numbers, you could get up to $3,000 at that time. The average was about $750, and that's because a lot of homeowners had accessed insurance policies.
Okay, I see. So they ended up, the money came from different places. Okay.
That's right. That's one of the concerns we raised in the report. How you deal with whether a home is insured or not, or can get insurance or not, is tricky, because you do not want to create a disincentive to go out and get the insurance if you can get it, right? And rely on such a program that the city offers, because then the city is stepping in as an insurance company, which it shouldn't be doing in these situations, in staff's opinion.
Right, and I think I pay a different rate based on my deductible for flooding in my house. So,
correct.
Okay.
And your policies accordingly.
can you draw a circle on a map around an area without us getting into trouble? And maybe what I'm saying further is I appreciate the argument in the Rockcliffe area, and I've heard about this before more than once about the specific technical issues, but I can point to issues, and you and I have talked about it in my own ward, where people have been essentially taken off the list and put at the end, right? And some of that's recently changed, but there were areas that had no prospect of any fix, and big areas. And so I don't know what I tell somebody who's had the same car underwater multiple times, that you're just not eligible for this part of the city because you don't live in that circle. Like, is that defendable as a city, or if we did this, would you recommend that it be open, or at least a broad criteria checklist?
If the council wanted to create a program, and that's the key word at the start of our report, no fault. We are saying very clearly, the city has no obligation to provide such programs, nor is it liable in the city's opinion. It's doing everything it can to try to address these flooding issues, and has allocated hundreds of millions of dollars towards this program. And so if it does want to do it, we would give you the exact same recommendations that were given back in 2006 when that was created, where we said make it defined, keep it to a group of individuals that were impacted, and that way it becomes an event-based situation. So that would be our recommendation. Keep it defined, keep it tight, and not open to anybody applying.
Okay, and to be clear, the event you're talking about here would have been an event in the past. So you're not proposing that this is, look, if it rains tomorrow, you get something. This is looking backwards. If you had a 311 call logged that proves that you had a flood, then you could go and apply for this grant. It's not an open-ended thing going forward. That's what you talked about in the report, I think.
We did. We were talking in a general situation, but in this, if we are just focusing on the Rockcliffe situation, when I was asked earlier what makes this different, is that it does have a defined floodplain area, and there's a number of businesses and residents that are located within that. Right. This program's focused solely on the residential homes, and they are within that regional floodplain. And so that's in the reports. In fact, that's in the TRCA report right now, the environmental assessment. You could go on their website, and anybody can look at the floodplain mapping and see that. So that's what you would ask me, what makes this different? That's why the situation is different. It's dealing with riverine flooding, and those homes are in a floodplain. They are more susceptible to flooding.
Okay, last question, Mr. Chair, if you just indulge me. There's two price stickers in here for two kind of concepts. One is 1.3 million and one is 6.5 million. If council gave you 1.3 or 6.5 or something in there, how fast could you accelerate the work that needs to be done to permanently fix the issue in Rockcliffe Smythe? Could you make it happen quicker with more money?
So the short answer is no, we're going as fast as we can. All three of those EAs that we described are high priority EAs. The city is not slowing down on any of that. We put the priority push on it. And in fact, the TRCA EA with transportation has received federal funding under the Disaster Mitigation Assistance Funding Program. So they're all priority projects. The key is completing the environmental assessments. And any of you, the councillors that have gone through the EA process can understand that that can take some time as we go back and forth and do the public consultation and we get feedback and comments from people. We have to go through that. And that's what we're going through right now. Once that's done, it then becomes moving it over into our engineering and construction shop and fast tracking the design and tendering components. That's when we can really start accelerating.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Holliday. Other questions of staff on this item? Seeing none, we're going to move to speakers. Speaker Nunziata, you had your hand up first.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I do have a motion that the clerk has, and I just want to tell staff I did amend it for what the original motion was, that City Council direct the General Manager, Toronto Water, in consultation with the Director of Insurance and Risk Management, Finance and Treasury Services, and the City Solicitor to report back in the second quarter of 2022 on criteria, funding, and implementation plan to provide a no-fault grant for residents in the Rockcliffe area located in Ward 5, York South-Weston, who have experienced basement flooding since 2000 until work is completed in Rockcliffe. And City Council direct the City Manager in consultation with the Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer and the General Manager, Toronto Water, to request the province to provide funding for municipal infrastructure improvements dealing with flooding issues. So that's my motion. And so I know members of council, and the reason I put that motion through council a few months ago is you've heard me talk about Rockcliffe for quite a while now, and I believe that the Rockcliffe area is very different than other areas. This area, for years, we've been working on work being done in the Rockcliffe area for over 10 years now. And as was mentioned with the Deputy Tinson as well with staff, is that TRCA did an environmental assessment, and then which took, and as you know, EAs take quite a while to process, to go through the public process. And then when it came back, it was decided no, they had to redo another EA because they wanted to expand the EA, which delayed it even more. So we've had delays and delays and delays. And as Lou mentioned, we did get a $20 million federal grant to TRCA. And I even put a motion, and you would remember a couple of years ago, to ask the province that any environmental assessments that's done with basement flooding, if they can expedite the process because of the time that it takes to go through an EA process. Now, I know that the city, and we do have the money in Rockcliffe, and we are working on it. But the problem is, and it's frustrating for me and frustrating for the residents, is the delays because of the environmental assessment. And we can't start the work and widen that Jane Street Bridge until the environmental assessment is complete. We did have a community meeting a few months ago, and I'm waiting to have the second one. But this goes on and on and on, and it's going to take years before we complete this whole process. In the meantime, whenever it rains in Rockcliffe, like I get so nervous because you don't know how much flooding we're going to have in the Rockcliffe area. And where I live as well, Councillor Holiday, is where the Humber River is, there where James Gardens is. And if I look out my balcony, I can see, whenever we have a rainstorm, I can see the water just right high, even along that Black Creek corridor, going to James Gardens and that whole area, because I can see that from my balcony. I've attended residents' homes whenever we've had a flood, and it's absolutely correct. Sewage in their basement. Cars are being flooded. I mean, I think, as Adamo mentioned, I think during the flood, they've had two of their cars.
No, I'm happy with that, yeah, because then it frees up. Don't forget, we're going to use Redo too. For,
Pat, you're on the line. Pat, you're on the line.
So this is very different in the Rockcliffe area than other areas. I'm not saying other areas are not a priority as well, but we do have within this whole area is the floodplain. There are 413 buildings, 622 properties. If you remember, in the last rainstorm, there was a business on Alliance Avenue where we had 3 individuals that were in an elevator and had to be rescued. We even have in that Rockcliffe area, the city owns a senior residence, which we have over 200 senior residents that live in the Beach Hall area. They were flooded. They can't get insurance. And this is city property. This is the city owns these buildings. I feel that the city is responsible. I think the city should take some responsibility in an area where we know that it's a priority area, and because of the delays with the environmental assessment, with all these delays, and the residents in that area continue to get flooded, that we do have a responsibility to these residents, that we can't just delay and wait for another 2 or 3 years before the work gets started. It's not fair to the residents, and the reason I put the staff report back in 2022 is that then we can decide at that time what the amount would be. But in this area, because of the number of floods that we've had, I'm asking that it will be available to the residents until the work is completed in Rockcliffe. So that's my motion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Speaker Nunziata. Does anybody have any questions of the mover?
I do, Mr. Chair. It's brief.
Speaker, sorry, have one of those moments again. Deputy Mayor Holiday.
Thank you. And through you to Councillor Nunziata, I understand what Councillor Nunziata is moving with this. I wanted to know if Councillor Nunziata would consider it a friendly amendment if I asked for some additional comparables, much the same way that staff did in this report, to show that if the program was focused on the Rockcliffe area, it was this price, but if we wanted to look at other areas that might have similar issues, it could be this price. And the reason I say that is I'm thoroughly convinced that although the scale is different, there are some very difficult issues in even my ward related to similar flooding conditions that I would have to have a look at the same time and understand what it meant. And would you be opposed if I asked staff to include that in the report, just as a consideration, and not take away from anything you've asked for in your report, but to provide a little bit of analysis that if it was to include other situations, this is what it would mean.
Yes, I'm fine with your amendment to ask for that,
Okay.
but I want my motion as far as the Rockcliffe residents in my area. When the staff reports back, and we can discuss the funding. But it's important to me that it's not just a one-time, that it will continue until the work is completed in Rockcliffe. Because of our delays, which is city delays, TRCA delays, I don't think that the residents from Rockcliffe should be penalized.
And appreciate it. And to Mr. Chair, I have sent a very brief set of words to the clerk. It doesn't ask for much other than to consider some other areas as part of the report.
We'll just wait for Matthew to get your wording.
I would say shamelessly, I mean, I hope those other areas include Ward 2, but I'll let the staff do that analysis.
Mr. Chair, if I can just ask for some clarification.
Sure.
If Councillor Nunziata sort of accepted Councillor Holiday's friendly amendment as part of her motion?
I believe she has.
Okay.
Am I correct? Deputy,
we can get it on the
sorry, Speaker Nunziata.
We should get it on the screen.
Let me see it on the screen because I don't want it to take away from my motion.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
I
understood.
Want to do that. So if there's a problem, please let me know.
Okay, we're going to display. We'll display it now. And we'll take a look at the wording here.
Could you highlight the end of the sentence so it's clear to everybody what I had suggested be added? And to include comparable costs. I would just look to Councillor Nunziata to make sure she's happy with that. I think it's okay.
Speaker Nunziata, are you okay with the amendment?
So the way it's worded, it doesn't, my motion will be a completely different motion, and Councillor Holiday would be an added report, but not to have any impact on my motion, correct?
That's my intent. It doesn't have to be a whole new report, but maybe a paragraph in that other report. I'll leave it up to staff, but yeah, I don't mean to remove any words or work out of what you've asked for. I only just want to have a little extra.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Are there other speakers on this item? Seeing none, so we have a motion before us from Speaker Nunziata, amended with a friendly amendment from Deputy Mayor Holiday. All in favor of the motion? That carries. Item as amended. All in favor? And that carries. Matthew, I believe that was our last item.
Yep, Mr. Chair, we
do have
a bylaw to pass as well, or to introduce and enact. So we will just put up that motion shortly.
Okay. And I am moving that the General Government and Licensing Committee pass and declares a bylaw, a confirmatory bill to confirm the legislative proceedings of the General Government and Licensing Committee acting under delegated authority at meeting number 25, held on September 15th, 2021. All in favor? That motion carries. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Mantas, all in favor? And the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate all your time and effort and input this morning. Thank you very much.